defeated the giant of the Philistine army, but they responded in very, very different ways. Saul saw David's success and became threatened. He began asking, what does David's success mean for me? What might I lose? How do I protect my position? Saul tightened his grip. Jonathan saw David's success and responded with love. He did not immediately treat David as a rival. He did not protect his status. He did not withhold what he had. Jonathan, instead of tightening his grip, opened his hands, gave him his robe, gave him his sword. Saul's posture was, how do I protect what belongs to me? And Jonathan's posture was, how can I use what I have to strengthen someone else? That's the first question of our faithfulness. Not what has God given me, but what am I doing with what God has given me? We all have something in our hands. We work in many different areas of this institution. Some have knowledge, some have leadership, some have experience, some have resources, some have influence. Some have access to people and opportunities that others do not have. And some have the trust of students, coworkers, family members, or friends, or a combination of any of those things. The question is whether we hold these things with closed hands or open hands. Do I use what I have to build my own importance? Or do I use what I have for God's purposes and the good of others? Do I see another person's success as a threat, like Saul? Or can I use what God has given me to strengthen them, like Jonathan? This has very practical implications for us at SFBC. A faculty member can use knowledge to prove how much they know, or they can use knowledge to patiently form students. A staff member can use authority to control people, or they can use authority to serve people and become a servant leader. As students, some of you are student workers, or there might be other students in here, although it's a lot of staff. They can see education only as a path to personal advancement, more degrees, better job, better position. Or they can see it as preparation to bless and serve others. A leader can protect visibility and recognition, or they can use influence to open doors for somebody else. Jonathan's first act of faithfulness was not dramatic. He took what was already in his hands and placed it at the service of another person. He gave David his robe, his armor, his sword, his bow, his belt. This was the heartbeat of the original message. Are you willing to give God everything? Not only the parts of your life that are easy to release and that you want to let go, not only the things that cost you very little, but the things connected to your identity, your security, your ambitions, your future, any sense of control you may have, because that's what Jonathan gave up in that moment. Faithfulness begins when we stop saying, this is mine, and begin saying, Lord, how do you want to use what you have placed in my hands? How do you want to use what you've placed in my hands? The crazy thing is Jonathan's surrender didn't end there. It didn't end with a robe, a sword, and a bow. And eventually he would have to surrender the future those things represented as well. 2 chapters later in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, Saul says something to Jonathan. He gets angry at his son. His anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? In verse 31, Saul says, as long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established, speaking to Jonathan. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Saul understood something. He understood exactly what David's rise meant for his son Jonathan. If David succeeds, Jonathan does not become king. If David lives, Jonathan's expected future changes dramatically. David's success appears to come at Jonathan's expense here, according to Saul's perspective. Saul sees David as a threat. To Saul, David is standing in the way of his son's future. Saul wants Jonathan to protect his position, his family's claim to the throne. He wants to defend his claim. He wants to see David as a rival. He wants Jonathan to see David as a rival. And Jonathan is in the middle of a choice. He can protect his position. He can grip tight. He can compete with David. He can undermine David. He can preserve his own future. or he can remain faithful to what God is doing. Jonathan chooses faithfulness. A few chapters later in 1 Samuel 23, it says, while David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Jonathan went home, but David remained at Horesh. Saul seeks to kill David, and what does Jonathan do? He goes and warns him. He gives him strength and gives him encouragement and says, this throne isn't mine, it's yours, David. It's an extraordinary moment. Jonathan goes to strengthen the men who will occupy the position that Jonathan might once have expected for himself. I'm sure at some point Jonathan expected in his life to be the next king. He doesn't go to negotiate. He doesn't go to protect his status. He doesn't go to remind David of what he's given up. And look what I'm giving to you, David. He goes to help David find strength in God in the middle of a tough moment for David. Jonathan doesn't sabotage David, doesn't compete with David, doesn't protect his territory, doesn't demand equal recognition, and he doesn't insist that his faithfulness preserve his status. Instead, Jonathan strengthens David's hand in God. He helps David endure. He confirms God's calling on David's life, and he supports God's purpose even when that purpose does not place Jonathan at the center. This is where Jonathan and Saul couldn't be more different, as I was explaining. Saul wanted God's plan to preserve his position, and Jonathan was willing to support God's plan even when it changed his own future. Saul clung to the throne, and Jonathan released his claim to it. Faithfulness doesn't just mean trusting in God with the little he's given you, as Luke says, but it also means supporting God's purposes even when we're not at the center of those purposes. That sounds simple until God begins working through somebody else close to you, until somebody else receives the opportunity that not only you hope for, but that you may have even deserved in the way Jonathan did, until someone else is promoted, until someone else is recognized, until someone else is chosen for the role that we thought should be ours. Then the real condition of our hearts begin to show, or our true character comes out. Jonathan was in that tough situation, and the questions you have to ask ourselves are, can I celebrate what God is doing when he is doing it with somebody else or through someone else? Can I strengthen someone whose success may mean less recognition for me in the same way Jonathan? Can I remain faithful when God's plan is good, but it's not the plan that I wrote for myself? Can I be thankful that the kingdom is advancing even when my name is not attached to it? Sometimes we say we want God's will, but what we really mean is that we want God's will to include our preferred role, or the idea that we had of where we should be in that purpose. We want God's purpose as long as we remain visible. We want the kingdom to advance as long as we are the ones leading the advancement. I believe Jonathan shows us a very complete and different kind of surrender here. He's willing for God's purpose to move forward without placing him at the center. He is willing to strengthen the person who will receive that he once expected. He is willing to say, God's purpose matters more than my position and my rightful place on that throne. Faculty, staff, faithfulness may mean helping someone else succeed instead of yourself. It may mean sharing information instead of protecting our own territory. It may mean mentoring someone who may eventually exceed us or do better things than us. It may mean celebrating another department's progress. It may mean doing necessary work even when someone else receives the recognition for it. It may mean using our experience to open doors for others rather than guarding our own importance. In college environments, as me, Mary, and others who've gone to other colleges see, it's easy to become protective. Protective of our role, protective of our department, protective of our influence, protective of the work that we've built with our bare hands. But kingdom faithfulness asks, am I building my territory or am I serving God's purpose and building him up? Students, in your classes, someone else may finish first. Someone else may receive the opportunity, whether an award that they received and you didn't. After graduation, another student receives an opportunity and you don't. Someone else may appear to move forward while you continue balancing work, family, ministry, school, all the above. Someone else in that class may seem to be living the future you've hoped for. But our comparison can quickly become resentment. Their success begins to feel like evidence of your failure. Their opportunity begins to feel like something has been taken from you, and their progress begins to make your own faithfulness feel insignificant. But the story of Jonathan reminds us of something different. Another person's calling doesn't cancel yours. Another person's success does not make your obedience meaningless. God's faithfulness to someone else is not proof that he's forgotten you. Faithfulness refuses to allow comparison to become resentment. It celebrates what God is doing, it strengthens others, and it remains obedient without demanding the center of attention. Jonathan here was not only faithful with the symbolic gestures of giving his robe, sword, bow, and more, but he was faithful when the throne represented by the robe would belong to somebody else. But Jonathan's story becomes even a little more difficult than just giving away the throne in that moment. He did not receive the future he imagined after his surrender. He remained faithful, but he did not live to see the outcome that he even expected. Remember Jonathan's giving of the throne to David. He said, I'll be second to you. But in 1 Samuel 31, many of you might know of the story here. Israel goes into battle against the Philistines. Saul, all his sons are with him, and all of his warriors. And Jonathan dies in battle with his father. David eventually becomes king shortly after that. But Jonathan never even lives to see David crowned. Jonathan never becomes second to David like he imagined. Jonathan had said to David, if you remember, you'll be king over all Israel, and I will be second to you. Jonathan appears to have imagined a future with both of them would serve together. Remember, Jonathan loved David. They were best of friends. David would become king. Jonathan would stand beside him. Their covenant would continue. Their friendship would survive Saul's opposition. But that future never comes. Jonathan never receives the position he imagined. He never serves beside David. He never sees the kingdom established under David. And he never sees the full result of the faithfulness that he showed in that moment. Jonathan surrendered the throne. He supported David. He protected David. He strengthened David in God, as we read. He remained faithful, yet he did not live to see the outcome. That's very difficult for us. It's difficult even for myself to read, because we often expect faithfulness to produce a visible reward. If we're faithful with that little, now I can get much, right, Lord? The verse is not meant to be a formulaic response in Luke. We believe sometimes that if we obey God, the story should turn out the way we hoped and the way we planned, just like Jonathan did. We believe that if we surrender something, God should eventually give us something better, right? We believe that if we are faithful in private, recognition should always eventually come in public. But Jonathan's story doesn't end that way, and often our stories don't end that way either. Faithfulness is not a transaction. It's not a formula. It's not a transaction through which we force God to give us something better because we gave him faithfulness in a little. We can misuse Luke 16 as though Jesus is saying, take care of the little thing now and God will eventually give you the bigger thing you really want. Be faithful in the hidden season and eventually everybody will recognize you. Surrender this opportunity and God will replace it with a better one. Sometimes God does entrust greater responsibility. That does happen. Sometimes a new opportunities come. Sometimes a season of hidden faithfulness leads to visible fruit. I'm not denying that stuff never happens, but that's not the reason that we're faithful. If we obey only because we expect promotion, our obedience is still centered on us. It's still contingent upon us being the center. If we surrender only because we expect something better in return, our surrender is really just negotiation with God. I'm willing to give you this if you give me that. If we serve only because we believe recognition will eventually come, our service is still controlled by our personal ambitions and our selfish pursuits. That can turn faithfulness into ambition wearing religious clothing. We may use spiritual language, we may talk about patience, preparation, and God's timing, but underneath it all, we still may be saying, God, I did my part, now you owe me the future that I want and that I've planned and I've envisioned for myself. Luke 16:10 teaches us that the way we handle small things truly reveals our character and who we are. It reveals whether we can be trusted. It reveals whether our devotion to God depends on reward. It reveals whether we love God himself or what we hope he will give us. Luke 16:10 unfortunately does not promise greater status, public recognition, a larger platform, that everything we surrender to God will even be returned, or that every disappointment will be reversed, or that faithfulness will produce the exact future we imagine, just like Jonathan. His life teaches us faithfulness is still valuable when we do not receive the throne. Obedience is still meaningful when we do not see the full result. Love is still genuine when it is not rewarded the way we expected. And surrender is real when it's not a strategy for gaining something better. Jonathan, despite his death, his faithfulness still mattered. David was preserved, David was strengthened, God's purpose continued, and Jonathan's life became an example of covenant loyalty, humility, and courage. Jonathan, unfortunately, did not see the whole outcome on this earth, but his inability to see the result did not make his obedience meaningless. Many of us know what it feels like to obey without seeing the result. We pray, but the answer doesn't come as expected. We served, but nobody noticed. We remained loyal, but the relationship still ended. We worked faithfully, but someone else received the opportunity. We surrendered the plan, but no better plan immediately appeared. Not every loss is something God directly causes. Now, that's not what I'm saying either. We live in a world marked by sin. We live in a sinful and fallen world full of broken relationships, illnesses, death, disappointment, the poor choices of other people. God is not the cause of those things. We are. We should not look at every painful event and casually say that God took that from you. Don't interpret my words as saying that either. But whatever the cause of the loss, the question of faithfulness remains for you in the midst of those losses. Will I continue to trust God when I no longer possess what I once treasured? Will I continue to obey when the future no longer looks like what I expected? And will I continue to believe that God is good when I cannot see how the story will end? This is where surrender becomes more than a moment. It's easy to surrender during an emotional prayer. It is harder, though, to live surrendered when weeks, months, or years pass without resolution. It's harder to remain faithful when the thing we placed in God's hand never returns back to ours. So, ask yourself, can I be faithful if my career develops differently than I planned? Can I be faithful if my ministry never becomes what I imagined or pictured? Can I be faithful if my education takes a little longer than expected? Can I be faithful if the recognition never comes? Can I be faithful when someone else receives the opportunity that I wanted? Can I be faithful when a season of influence comes to an end? Can I be faithful when a relationship changes? And can I be faithful when what was once in my hands is no longer mine to hold? Some of us may be in that place right now. Your hands were once full, you had a plan, you had a position, you had a relationship, you had a sense maybe of where life was going, and now your hands feel empty. Empty hands sometimes can feel like evidence that God has forgotten us or forsaken us. But empty hands can also become the place where trust is purified in you, where we learn to love God apart from the outcomes or results, where we learn that our identity was never supposed to rest in the thing that we lost, or when we learn that God is still worthy even when the story remains unresolved and unfinished. Real surrender says this: God, I trust you not only with what is in my hands, I trust you with what leaves my hands. Jonathan was faithful when his hands were full of abundance. He was faithful when he had to open them, and he remained faithful when the future left them empty for him. That brings us back to the question, what does it truly mean to give God everything? Jonathan was faithful with what was in his hands. Remember, he gave David his robe, his armor, his sword, his bow, his belt. Jonathan continued to remain faithful when his expected future changed. He protected David. He strengthened David in God when his father Saul was seeking to kill him, and he accepted that David would become king. And Jonathan was faithful when God's purpose did not place him at the center. He supported the man that would receive his throne. He chose God's purpose over his own position, and he chose covenant faithfulness over personal ambition. Jonathan remained faithful even though he did not live to see the future he imagined. He never saw David become crowned. He never became second to David as he desired, and he never saw the full outcome of his surrender. Remember Luke 16:10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Being faithful with little does not simply mean managing small things well so that one day we receive bigger things. It means becoming the same kind of person in every season. It means being faithful regardless of what is in our hands. Faithful when our hands are full, faithful when our hands are open, and faithful when our hands feel empty. When I first encountered this passage of Jonathan, I felt God asking me, are you willing to give everything? At that time, I thought mainly about my work, my ministry, my ambitions, my plans, my desire for control, the things competing for my heart. I still think God asks us to surrender all of that. He does ask for our plans, our ambitions, our titles, our influences, our futures we've imagined for ourselves. But I now believe the deeper question is not only will you give it to me, the deeper question is will you continue to trust me if surrender changes what you thought your life would look like? It's one thing to give God something in a moment of prayer, but it's another thing to remain faithful when the outcome isn't what we expected. It's another thing to keep trusting when the door stays closed for long periods of times. It's another thing to keep serving when someone else receives the opportunity. And it's another thing to keep believing when what we placed in God's hands never returns to ours. So before we close, I'd like us all to just close our eyes. And I want you to sit with a few questions that I want you to ask yourself. What are you holding too tightly this morning? What has become too central to your identity? Is someone else's success beginning to feel like a threat? Is there a future in your mind that you've assumed God owes you? Is there something you once placed in God's hands but have quietly taken it back? Is there something that you've lost that has made it difficult to trust God? And can you trust God not only with what He gives you, but also with what you no longer have? Jonathan's life invites us to pray with open hands. Lord, use what I have. Lord, teach me to hold it with open hands. Lord, redirect the future I planned. Lord, help me bless others when they receive what I wanted. Lord, continue forming me when I do not understand what I've lost. Lord, whether my hands are full or empty, we are all still yours and your children. Amen. That's faithfulness. Faithful with little, faithful with much, faithful with full hands, faithful with open hands, faithful with empty hands. I believe that's what it truly means to give God everything. Thank you all.
Well, I don't know. I want to go to the prayer room and take out my journal. Well, thank you, Josiah, and thank you, everyone. I hope you are blessed. This is the last chapel of the semester, and then we're going to start back in August 17 with convocation, and I hope y'all are excited. I'm just going to say a bunch of verses, Philippians 1, 3-6. I like reading this over students. I'm going to read it over us as staff. Maybe some students are here, and over Judah as well, because I see him. I thank God every time I remember you. And just as before I read, I just, in a posture, a physical demonstration, the posture of our hearts. Let's just open our hands so that we connect as we receive this word. I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. God bless you. You are dismissed. Thank you.